perfect. All right, so as Leslie alluded to, this is a bonus session. We're going to have 2 bonus sessions, so one will be next Tuesday as well. So thanks for adjusting on the fly and making this work and showing up today. I'm going to share my screen and introduce tonight's presenter. So tonight we're going to have Scott Fetterly present on the journey. I'm not starting with a quote because Scott has a quote that he will start with. So great minds think alike. Scott was born and raised in the Northwest. He lived in Renton for 55 years. He worked for 40 years at the Boeing Company and recently retired in January of 2018. Started his high school officiating career in 1978. His first varsity game was in 1983. And his best moment was off the court. He met Kellie in 1989 through basketball. And he'll elaborate on that a little bit as he goes through the presentation here. His first state tournament was in 1990. He was a college basketball official from 1988 to 2013. So you can see a ton of experience and knowledge. He worked several state tournaments, state championship official for 1A, 3A, and 4A. He served many years on the PNBOA board and is currently a member. He's also a counselor for the PNBOA, Bob Harold, and Ron Omori camps, and he's a former state rules clinician. So quick backstory, I met Scott 6 years ago. I started my career in Snohomish County and then came over to PNBOA through a transfer tryout. And at that tryout, we had a few evaluators and Scott happened to be there. And just wanted to say a lot of what he's going to talk to kind of relates to the first conversation I ever had with Scott. He pulled me aside during that tryout and made sure that I had a mentor and was really just there for me. He offered to help me during my transition there and just help me along the way. And that's always stuck with me. And 5 years later, I got to work my first game with him. And so that was a really fun experience as well. Will Hart, me and him had games almost back to back last year. So that was really fun. Anyway, I'm going to stop sharing now and let Scott take over. So Scott, thank you for being here and thank you for giving us your time.
You're welcome. Well, let's see if I can figure this out.
Yeah, if not, like I said, I can take the screen again.
Okay, everybody see that?
Oh, Scott.
Yeah.
Probably the same slide that we just saw. So when I first started officiating, I didn't have a mentor. I wasn't exactly the best listener that you could find. And I had my first mentors that I ran across were Al Murch and Al Rossi. And when Bob asked me to talk about a journey, this quote kind of hit home with me. And I was told if I didn't have a mentor or help along the way, getting back to Bob's point, your journey's not going to last very long and you're not going to go very far. And I was an example of the not going to go very far at the beginning. So we'll go down through and we'll explain. So I started playing in the Boeing Rec League at about 230 pounds. I had been a McDonald's restaurant manager, and I ate most of the profits. So when I left there and started working at the Boeing Company, I was fat. There's no other way to put it. So I thought I need a way to exercise or I'm going to die. So I started playing in that league. And after a couple games, I'm thinking, you know what? I could referee because I know I can't do any worse than the guys we had. So I thought, I'm signing up. So I called the association, and I'm not even sure how I got that information back in that point in time because we didn't have a website for darn sure. There was not really an apprentice coordinator. I probably called John Sullivan, who was what we called the commissioner then. We didn't call him an assigning secretary. He was the commissioner because he was in charge of everything. So he said, hey, we're glad to have you. So I want you to go out and buy a uniform. And next Thursday night, I want you to show up at a junior high in Auburn. That was my apprentice training. So for you guys on the call tonight, having an apprentice training, having somebody like Stacy Brodzik train you and have some of the mentors that you guys are going to have, you're way ahead of where I was when I first started this thing. So I worked my very first game, and the only guy on the call that's going to remember this name is John Lindsay. I worked with a guy named Jeff Shirtleff, who was a pretty middle of the pack varsity official that was great at training the young guys. So I got lucky to work with him because I worked a lot of rec games at the beginning. And contrary to popular belief, I used to work rec games. I don't now because I only have so many games left in my legs. So I don't work too many well, I don't work any rec games, let's face it. So he told me, go home and start practicing your mechanics in the mirror. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Well, we all do it now. I felt like an idiot then, but I don't feel like an idiot when I practice mechanics now. So I worked about 100 rec games a year, mostly men's rec, some of the younger kids stuff. I used to work in a place down that's a Boeing building down in the middle of Renton that was called Mother's Park. John remembers reffing there. I know John and I actually reffed there. Like I put in my slide here, I had no business working that league at the time. I was a novice. I wasn't very good. I didn't listen. And that was the highest level rec games in the kind of the area that I worked in. And I would call the assigner. We had one guy that did only rec assigning, kind of like now, and one guy that did school. His name was Irv Leifer, who he was a legend at Renton High School as a basketball coach. Yeah, I don't know how many state tournaments he won, but 3 or 4 back in his day. Well, I'd call Sunday night and cherry pick all those games down at Mother's Park because they were the best to work. And I figure, hell, I might as well work those so I can learn quick. So as you saw in my biography, I started in '78 and worked my first varsity game years later. Why? Well, we talked about the mentor. I didn't have one. I didn't know what a mentor was. I didn't really think high school basketball was going to be my deal because I was going to go to the NBA. I was pretty steadfast on that. And I had a good referee friend that I still see time to time that he and I started the same year. His name was Greg Smith, one of the better guys to come out of PNBOA over the years. He kind of knocked me upside the head with a 2x4 and told me that you're never going to make the NBA. Well, first of all, you're never going to be good enough. So he finally kind of helped me straighten myself out that I better look at a different venue or different avenues. So Greg helped me to listen, and he taught me to learn mechanics. So now all of a sudden, I got a mentor, and that mentor was John Sullivan, and a gentleman by the name of Dave Wheeler and Dave Staudiker. Those are 2 guys back in the day that were top varsity state tournament officials. John knows them. John's reffed with them. So they talked me into signing up to go to Bob Harrell's camp in 1983. In fact, John Lindsay, Joe Jarvie, and I went down together. So a week before I was going to get on the plane with John and Joe, he called me and said, "You're not going to use your ticket down because I'm picking you up and we're riding down together." So we stopped at every cool rest stop that you'll ever know on the West Coast, all the way down to Bob Harrell's camp, down to California. And I got a crash course on how to be a better referee on the way down. He would stop the games. He would position me, embarrassing as hell, that by the time we got back, I had a different direction. And he told me, "You're going to quit or you're going to get better because you're wasting my time." And that hit home to me. And so I started working. I started getting some varsity games. And, you know, I worked a lot with John back in those days. And I'm going to echo it again, and I put it in my slide. Our assigner was one of the best officials to come out of this group. He was a partner that always had your back. And I'm not going to even get into the stories because we'd be here all night long. So I got my first varsity assignment. It was a 3A game. That was back before we had 4A. I was supposed to be doing a JV game somewhere, got called and went and did this game. Both coaches beat the crap out of me, but I learned from it. And then I started getting games pretty much on a regular basis. And you guys people that are newer aren't going to believe the way we used to get our games. After the meeting, the assignments we put up on the wall, and you would go and you would sign for your games, write them in your calendar, and go off on your merry way. And it took forever because all the officials were looking at, well, who's working this game? Who's working that game? And trying to figure out who's getting better games in there. So it took a long time to finally get your assignments written down in your book. So I started getting the opportunity as I got a little bit better. My ratings got better. And frankly, the reason why I got more games is because unlike today, when you got a lot of college games, you went on and did those. You didn't come back and do high school games. Like guys like Bob here, he's doing a lot of college stuff, but he's coming back and giving back at the high school level. The people back then weren't really doing that. So by attrition, I got some games. So establishing myself took a while, but now remember this was all 2-person. I was starting to get some of the better Metro games, but I was always working that game with somebody like John Lindsay or Dave Wheeler or Dave Stoddard, or guys that keep me out of trouble. So I've got my first playoff game in 1987. My first playoff game was at the Seattle Center Arena. I'm not even sure if that building's still there. And I worked with a gentleman by the name of Paul Henderson, who's one of our better officials. Picked me up, we drove together, and he said in the locker room before the game, "Make sure your first call's a good one." How many of you guys have heard that in your games? Well, the ball comes into the post, the guy gets barely touched, and I got a foul call. And I see Paul out there on top of the key with his hands over his head. Not a good start. So after working a few years of high school varsity, I got hired in the community college ranks. I would work 2 years at the BCC summer camp. We were over there working 2 nights a week, working for free, just trying to get seen. I had no idea that I was getting observed on a game that meant nothing. I was working with Greg Smith in the back gym after dark. We're working Garfield against somebody, and I have no idea that Ron Amori was hiding in the corner of the gym, seeing how we worked the game. I put in the slide here, you never know who's watching, so you better work every game like it's a real game. If we would have screwed around on that game, never would have got a college schedule. I worked a college game that year with Ron. Game went good. I worked, several games with very, very veteran crews. Again, 2-person. My first season, I had 22 ball games. And a lot of those games were JV games at UPS and PLU back when they had those programs. And I don't know how many on the call know, I know a lot of you know Greg Nixon. He had just come from back east. He grew up in the New York area. He had just come to the Northwest and was getting his feet wet in the college program. And he's moved on to do much bigger things than I have. He's done several NC2A tournaments, and he's one of the lead dogs in the Pac-12 now. Second season, I worked 4 games. I worked about 1 game a month. It's really impossible to get better when you've got 1 game a month, and not many of those were league games. So I went from working a lot and some league games to not much. That's because we had a new assigner that didn't know who the hell I was. And just laying it out the line, that's probably going to happen to some of you. So getting on, I'm going to laugh here, sorry. Getting on to the best part of my career. I was observing games for the SOWB back when we still had that, the women's group. John sent me to Auburn to do a game, and I observed Kellie. And we hit it off good. I was, I had probably not a right approach to evaluating back then. I didn't have the sandwich approach like Matt Mason taught me, where you start with some good, go through some, needs some improvements, and end with really pretty much hammered her with not a very kid glove approach. And she didn't seem to get scared away. So about a week later, I ran into her at Skagit Valley. She was doing the girls game, I was doing the men's. And then a week later, I saw her at a Sonic game. I'm sitting right behind her. There's 14,000 people there. What are the odds? So I figured that fate jumped in here. We got married about a year later, and we've been married we just celebrated our 30th anniversary. And I keep forgetting, I don't know if Kellie's on the call or not, but there have been very blissful years.
Very blissful years.
I figured you'd be on, okay.
Congratulations to anyone that stayed with you for 30 years.
Thank you. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna,
Scott.
I don't know if Kellie, you want to jump in, or do you want me to just work through that?
That would be no, you can keep going.
All right, so the picture here was taken either during the 2007 or 2008 state tournament when Kellie and I were tasked, along with Ira and Leslie Fitzpatrick, to run the 3A official in Seattle. We were in charge of the officials. It was kind of a collaborative effort amongst all of us. So she has always had a big crush on Dave Valley. So I saw Dave in the stands and went over, asked him if he would mind taking a picture with Kel, and he was very happy to oblige. So that's where that picture came from. So Kellie was born and raised in Snohomish. She's been at Toyota Motor Credit for almost 25 years. I'm hoping she retires within a year so we can move on, maybe to Arizona. She started officiating in 1983. As you can see, she made it to varsity a hell of a lot quicker than I did because she was way better and listened. And I know she had mentors. She worked her first state tournament in 1991. And I'm going to do a little bit of bragging here. She was the first woman to work a boys state tournament in the state of Washington. She worked the final that year in Spokane. And a quick funny story, I went over to watch her on the first day of the tournament, which was a Wednesday. And she was standing out there working the 9 o'clock game. And you know how we stand out and we look, observing players and all that. This one older gentleman came over and put his arm around her and said, "Honey, the girls' court is over there." And Kellie politely said, "Thank you, sir, but I'm working the boys tournament." And I'll never forget the look on that guy's face. That was a classic. So Kellie ended up working the championship game, a televised game with the same official that she worked the first game with, who I'd worked many college games with. He's from the Port Angeles area. Kellie was a college basketball official from 98 to 2012. And I'm never going to hear the end of this one either. She made it Division I, I didn't. She worked a lot of games for the Pac-10 between 91 and 95, worked several state tournaments, including 3 boys tournaments, several women's finals, many years on the PNBOA, or excuse me, SOWB board. She was a counselor for the PNBOA and SOWB camps, along with the Dana Center camps and others. She deserved to be a state rules clinician. I only got to be a clinician because I kind of tagged along with her. And obviously we already talked about Dave Valley. So we already kind of talked about the state tournament. I've been lucky enough to do a few state tournaments, been lucky enough to do a few state finals. I'll never forget my first one. I worked a game with a guy named Rick Davis, who was one of the best officials that I've ever worked with in state tournaments. He's from the Longview area. We had a kick, semifinal between Blaine and Grandview. There were 17,000 people in the Tacoma Dome. Rick and I, in my opinion, humble opinion, were the 2 best referees in that tournament. There was 12 of us, but we didn't get the final because we let the the Blaine coach come out and just rag on us, cuss at us at mid-court in the center circle, and we didn't do a damn thing about it. So I wasn't surprised when the assignments came out that night that we didn't get the final. So I learned a lot. I learned how to handle my business, and I worked several after that, and never had that happen to me again because I learned from my first mistake. Working state tournaments was a highlight of my career. I was lucky enough to do my last one in 2019. I actually worked 3 women's tournaments, and I told Kellie a long time ago, I'll never do a girls tournament. Well, I worked 3 of them, and I had a blast doing every one of them. So let me tell you a little bit about my community college career. I worked probably, well, like I said in the beginning, I worked 22 games the first year, then very few games the second year. After my 3rd year, I probably worked 15 or so games. And a gentleman by the name of Frank Bissoni, who just passed away this year, was head of all of the community colleges. He also was in charge of assigning the officials for the community college state tournament. Well, I got a call one night and he asked me if I was available to do the tournament. And I thought, why would he be calling a 3rd year guy to go do the community college tournament? And of course I was honored and I accepted, but I wasn't ready to do that kind of level of basketball. Well, I got to work my first game in the tournament. It was at the host school, Lower Columbia College. They were playing one of their #1 rivals in Highline Community College. We had 2 very volatile, tough to work for coaches. And I worked a game with Bob Holloway. And I think Bob is probably thinking, why me? Why am I getting stuck with the rookie? So we're going through the game, and I think we're pretty close to halftime, and I had a bonehead call, and I want to say it was against Highline, and the coach took and threw the ball at me from about 5 feet away. Somehow I reacted and caught the ball, and before I even knew what to do, could do anything, Bobby whacked him. So talk about having your partner's back. So after the game, we got through it. I want to say that Highline ended up beating the home team. Bobby and I went over and had an adult beverage at the hotel I was staying at. And all of a sudden, who walks in the bar but the two coaches? Well, they came over, sat down, hashed out the game. It was all good, bought us beers, and on we went. And I think I worked all my games. Bob, you can fill in the blank that I think I worked all my games in that tournament with you until I got sent home, and you continued to work through the finals. Is that about right?
That would be correct, pretty much.
Okay. So you never know, when your opportunity is going to come. I wasn't really ready, but I worked with people like Bob that got me through games like that. I can tell you the same stories about when I got in the Division II program. I had people like Bob and Bobby Rose out of Longview that I worked a lot of games with that helped me through. I think one or 2 years, I was the only one that was working women's Division II and men's Division II, and women's community college and men's community college and the high school program. So I was working out of a lot of different rule books. And I know a lot of you on the call can relate to that. Chuck and Bob can tell you, it takes a lot of discipline to know what gym you're in that night, what rules you got, because there's a heck of a lot of difference between the college rules and high school rules, as far as technical fouls and flagrant fouls and things like that. And you really got to know your stuff to be able to be successful in those arenas. So, closing remarks. Got a good picture of Bob and I working that game he was talking about. That happened to be this year's district semifinal between O'Day and Garfield. He and Mr. Will Hart did a wonderful job in that game. So I've met some great people over my career. Obviously, I've met my wife. Almost all of my best friends are referees. I still enjoy teaching. I have some mentees that are on this call. Twyla is one of them. It's fun seeing them grow as officials. And she hasn't even worked her first real game yet. But we go back and forth all the time on the rules and the test and things like that. It's fun for me to be a mentor. I've really learned a lot from my newer partners, and I'm going to say newer as in the people that have only been refereeing for under 10 years. Guys like Will Hart and Bob that I'm willing to learn. I don't care how long you've been doing it. If you think you know it all, it's time to quit. And I'm really proud to have been here for 42 seasons. Last year I completed my 42nd season as a referee. So that's really all I think I have, other than a couple fun pictures. So I'm going to tell you a story about the picture on the left. That was before the 2010 state championship game. I had the pleasure of working with two PNBOA officials. Rarely is there two PNBOA officials on a state championship game. And having three was shocking. We actually had a gentleman that finished fourth in the ratings that year that was from Lower Columbia, Longview. And Mark Morris was playing O'Day in the championship game. It would have looked a lot better optically to have our two Seattle people and the gentleman that would have been representing Longview, where Mark Morris High School is. I know that the coaches would have been a lot more comfortable, but they stuck by their guns and went with number 1, 2, and 3 to work the final. And Woody, God rest his soul, Woody went into the tournament manager's office before the game, or actually the night of the assignment. So Friday night before the final was going to be played on Saturday, and said, the optics doesn't look good on this, I'm willing to back out and let the other gentleman do the game with Scott and Rod. And I'm pretty sure Rod did the same thing. So it doesn't look, you know, kind of like the scales are tilted towards O'Day when we walk out on the floor. And he said, no, I'm going to go with the 3 gentlemen that finished first on the list. And you're going to go out and referee the game. When we walked out on the court that night, we got booed by the Mark Morris fans. The coach was great. We didn't have any issues in the game. O'Day ended up winning the game. It was a close game, but we didn't have any issues. The coach from Mark Morris is nothing but a gentleman. So the game went okay, but it was starting out to be a maybe possibly scary night. So the picture there, you see Kellie working at Heck Ed. Garfield, and I've forgotten who they were playing at that point. She was working a 2-person game with Paul Henderson that night. That's when we used to have the MLK Day at the University of Washington. Bottom left picture is myself working a state tournament game with a gentleman that does all of our, sends all the pictures we have, Mark Myers. That one picture was at Universal Studios with Kellie on Apollo 13 with the crew there. And the picture on the right was, I was lucky enough to be featured on Referee Magazine, kind of out of the blue. I got a call from them. I think it was the January 2018 edition. I got a call and asked them if I would be willing to have my picture and would the picture they picked be sufficient. And the only reason I got picked for that is one of the guys that does takes a lot of our pictures at a lot of Kingco games, Dale Garvey, works for Referee Magazine, and he's been a friend of Kellie's and mine for a long time. And I know that he was 100% behind that. So that was a heck of an honor to have that picture on Referee Magazine. And then they turned around and sent me a plaque with that cover on it. So that was a pretty cool thing that happened a couple of years ago. So Bob, that's all I have. If anybody has any questions for me, I'll try to answer as honestly and candidly as I can.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. Scott, I'll just start out with one and kind of a takeaway that I heard throughout the presentation as well. When you were younger, obviously you said that you were gonna go to the NBA. So that's more of a destination goal versus a goal with the journey, right? So throughout the presentation, we heard how that shifted and how you started focusing more on the journey. So for the younger officials on the call, what kind of advice can you give to them to shift that mindset or shift that focus? And when you do, did you see more success?
So the thing that really turned my destination to a journey was people like Greg Smith. Greg and I would work almost all the games at Mothers Park together. And he would always try to convince me what I needed to do to get better. I mean, he was always on me about mechanics. And it's like, hey, I don't care about mechanics. They don't use the same mechanics when I get to the NBA. So he helped shift my journey, or pretty much my goal to a journey. And I had Dave Stodaker and Dave Wheeler kind of come in my life at that time and kind of took me aside and kind of showed me, you know, here's what you need to do to be successful. And, you know, just looking at them, I knew that they were working the games I wanted to go do. To be honest with you, I didn't even know if I'd ever get a varsity game, let alone a state tournament game. And, you know, I would go as a JV official, I would stay for the entire varsity game, and I would go pick their brain after the game, and I would go out and have a beverage with them after the game. And I will tell you one thing that's disappointing to me right now in our group, and there's a lot of different circumstances now. I mean, our people that work JV games, they care, they want to get better, but we have so many games to cover. They're leaving a JV game and they're going to two or three rec games for Leslie. So it's not as easy to hang around and go watch that whole varsity game. I'd say that probably half the games I do, the JV officials stay for maybe a half of the game and then take off because they have families, they have jobs. It was really important to me. It kind of became, it finally became a passion. I don't want to say obsession because I don't think I've ever been obsessed with it, but it definitely became a passion to me. And I saw by watching other JV officials that I had come in with, I saw them starting to make varsity and getting better games. And here I was still not doing that. So I finally started listening and, learning the rules better, getting better mechanics, all those things that kind of moved me along the way. And I forgot what the second part of your question was, Bob. Oh yeah, success. Yeah, I saw more success. I'm a true believer. If you work hard, you're going to be successful at this. In the same breath, not everybody that's doing this is going to work. And I know that I probably shouldn't even be saying this, but it's true. Not everybody's going to work the Metro Championship. Not everybody's going to work the Kingo 4A Championship. And you might not get a chance to work a state tournament. And if you do, you're not guaranteed that you're going to work the finals because it's really competitive to get to those levels. And there's a lot of people on this call that have made it to that level, and they'll tell you, sometimes you make it. And some of the years where I thought I had really good tournaments, I didn't get my name called at the end of the night. But you know what? I still went and watched every game the next day, and I congratulated and shook the hand of every single person that made the finals. And I've been in that locker room at the Tacoma Dome on Friday night at midnight when they post the assignments and seeing guys hit the wall, smack their hand on the wall, turn around and swear. And, it's kind of embarrassing to see that kind of activity, but I was always going to never be that guy because I had the people that were my mentors. I saw how they handled that. It's not rejection. It's just that you didn't quite make it to that final game. So I saw how they handled it and I kind of adopted that technique.
Yeah, that was great. And a lot of that, working those games, those are all destination type aspirations, right?
Yeah.
Whereas you were saying you stuck around and that's more so enjoying the journey. So that's great. I know Augustavo had a couple questions. So Augustavo, do you want to unmute and go ahead and ask?
We're unmuted.
Hey, David.
Scott, hey, welcome. Thanks for doing this. Two questions for you. One of them is your most memorable game. Let that be the second one. The first question is a couple stories, Metro coach stories that had you and your partners or things you talked about a long time, or you got in your car and went, holy, whatever the next word is.
Oh my God, we could go on all night on that one.
Just start talking then. Start telling stories.
One of my favorite Metro stories was probably 5 years ago. Velko and I were working. I forgot who our third was. It was a younger official, and excuse me if I say younger officials. I don't mean offense by it. Less experienced varsity official that night. We're about a minute and a half into the game. And for those of you that have never refereed a game for Mike Kelly at Seattle Prep, he can be kind of difficult, even if you're experienced. Well, he was kind of picking on the less experienced person. And I happened to be right in front of him during a possible foul, maybe not. Velco passed on it. We were getting ready to inbound the ball, and Mike Kelly stood right in my ear and he said, "Scott, I hate to start in so early." And I turned right around without taking my eye off the court, and I said, "Well, then don't." And when I did that, all of a sudden the crowd had kind of come down to being very quiet, like almost pin drop quiet. And it's like, oh my God, now I'm hollering at the coach at the top of my lungs. Well, I want to tell you, it was really effective because Mike was so embarrassed that I never heard another word from him the rest of the night. So my other favorite Metro story was doing a game. Oh God. It was the Metro Championship game. And I remember the game because we had a fight. It was the only fight I ever had in a high school varsity basketball game. And it was working with Ira Dunbar. And I got to tell you now, thank God Ira was there. And thank God we had a lot of Seattle policemen. It was Rainier Beach, Lakeside, and Garfield High School. In fact, Kelly had worked the girls' game right before that, so she was there. So she was a witness to all this. And there was probably 15 officials in the locker room after the game because they were all there too. But it was probably middle or beginning of fourth quarter. We had a little kind of starting to talk, and all of a sudden one of the players for Rainier Beach put his head in the stomach of one of the Lakeside guys and ran him into the stands. So we got that all taken care of, all broken up, but not one person, not one referee had the eyes on the benches. Well, turns out that four Rainier Beach guys came off the bench. Nobody from Lakeside came off the bench, and I could tell you that because I was looking at that bench. Nobody had the Rainier Beach bench. The assistant coaches were out there helping us. So we got order restored, and in my infinite wisdom, before talking to the coaches, before talking to my partners, I went and talked to the public address announcers and told them what we were going to do. Well, it didn't turn out as good as you would want a game to turn out. We had an escort off the court after the game, and the coach from one of the teams who will remain nameless continued to berate my partner on the phone to John while we were trying to get showered after the game. That one partner was in the shower, didn't hear all that was going on. And so I lost a lot of respect for that coach that night, but a lot of it was my fault for not handling my business. So that was one of my most memorable experiences in a Metro game. I have another better story for one of my most memorable state tournament assignments.
Hey, Scott, I sent you a private text. If you could take a look at it, maybe touch on that.
You what?
I sent you a private text, or I am there. If you could take a look at it and maybe touch on that.
How do I get to it? I can't see it on my screen.
Look in the chat. So my question,
Scott, go ahead and stop sharing your screen. And
Oh, that's
you should be
okay.
able to see it.
hey, I'll just ask him. Hey, Scott.
Okay,
Scott,
now I got it. Now
Okay.
I got it.
All right.
All right, so I'm going to read the question, Jeff. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Talk about the transition from men's to women's and how the men's officials said they would never do women's basketball and the change of heart. Well, that's easy. I'm married to a referee that does women's basketball. And I sort of got my arm twisted. And one of my best friends in the world is Leslie Fitzpatrick. And I kind of got my arm twisted there too. So they kind of convinced me that, you know what, why don't you try the women's game? And I'm really glad I did, because I really enjoyed working women's college. And I got a chance to work I got a chance to go up to Alaska to work some games, and down to California and Idaho to work some games, where I would have never got to do that had I not started working the women's program. I got a really kind of an interesting story on how I got my first Division II contract, or actually my women's contract. I was at a board meeting one night with Joe Thompson, and he took me aside after the board meeting. We were having an adult beverage, I'm pretty sure of the case. And he pulled me aside and said, hey, one of our best officials just gave back his 25 game schedule because of a medical reason. If you called Dana Sanders, I bet you could go to work for Dana. Dana was assigning all of the women's basketball division, well, at the time, Division 1, 2, 3, NAIA, all that.
GNAC.
And so I called Dana, and she said, Scott, I'd love to have you. I know you well enough. I know Kelly. Learn the mechanics. And she used a different word, learn the mechanics. And go work your schedule. So I had a lot of animosity towards me because I never went to a women's camp. I had a lot of people send me some pretty nasty emails. That was back before we had text. And it's not fair. I've been to camp every year. Dana's never picked me up. Well, it wasn't my fault that they weren't getting hired. I saw an opportunity because of Joe, and I got hired and ended up working that 25 game schedule that gentleman had to give back. I would have never got that had that not kind of just dropped in my lap. So, you know, it was not that tough of a transition. Once I got my head wrapped around the fact that I was going to work women's basketball and got the stubbornness out of my system. One thing I'm going to give Kelly a lot of credit for is she knocked me off my egotistical pedestal. I went through times where if I wasn't working the best Metro game in town, I was not real happy because how come I'm not on that game? And Kelly really helped me a lot with that. And I try to help officials with that now because we have a lot of officials that think they should be working the best game in town every night. And I finally learned that the best game in town was the one I was working. And once I came to grips with that realization, I became a better referee. I'm better today than I have been, 20 years ago. I don't run as fast as I used to. That's well documented. But I know I'm a better person. I'm a better partner. I'm a better communicator to the coaches because of those things. Jeff, does that answer your question?
Yeah, for the most part. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask one question? Sorry, can I ask one question to Scott?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kevin Volchek, I got my first crack at playoffs last year, but I know with you and doing, different division of leagues to playoffs, to state, obviously these are different officials that come in. Do you have a kind of a game management or pre-game management that you go through if you haven't refed with certain officials coming into these bigger games?
Yes, I do. So first of all, I use a pregame card that we created a long time ago that I still think's up on the PNBOA site. I update that all the time with the latest in, what the new rules are, what the points of emphasis and all the things are. I try not to leave anything unturned. And my first thing I talk about in that game, if it's a game that I'm going to work, let's just pick Rainier Beach O'Day. That's always a tough one. If I've never worked with that partner that I'm going to work with that night, I just go from top to bottom on my pregame sheet. We talk about matchups. If there's anything we know of that might have happened in the last game, we know the coaches don't like each other, so we know we're going to have to manage the coaches. I'm not saying those two coaches don't, but I'm just saying, you know, if that's the case, those are the kind of things we're going to talk about. You try to never go into a game with preconceived notions that we're going to, you know, call a technical as soon as that guy opens his mouth, so to speak. But we want to know if anything's gone on there, because we want to be preventative before the game starts. Kevin, does that answer your question?
Appreciate it. Yep.
I don't care. I hear guys all the time. We have one official that everybody knows that never does a pregame no matter what. He could be doing the state championship game with two people he's never met before, and he's not going to do a pregame because he thinks that it's beneath him. I think a pregame is really important. And I learned that kind of stuff from guys like Bob Holloway, you know, Mike Partlow, two of our better evaluators. You don't leave any stone unturned, because if you do, you're going to have something come up in the game that you're not going to be prepared for. And it's going to turn out like the Metro Championship game I already described.
Yeah, Scott, I think we got a couple more questions, one from Leslie, and then we'll go to Doug.
Thanks, Scott. Couple
You're
questions.
welcome.
You had a couple tough coach situations. You had the one you said at the CC tournament. What were kind of your lessons learned from that? And then you had the fight in the Metro Championship game. So can you talk from those situations, what your lessons learned that you took to the following games after those experiences?
Absolutely. So I'm going to start with the game I worked with Bob Holloway in the CC tournament. So the main reason behind that is I wasn't ready to do that level of basketball. And I knew it. And my confidence wasn't where it needed to be. And I think the coaches kind of picked on the fact that I didn't look confident. As much as Bob tried to help me, it wasn't going to make me any better that particular night. I will say that I had, Bob and I had the game the second night too. We had one of those same teams, and I forgot who they played the next game, but at this point it would have been a quarterfinal game. And my confidence was higher because I got through that game. And I think I acquitted myself okay in the end of that game. But coaches know when you're not confident. Your body language tells the story that you're not confident, and they're going to jump all over you. And I think I learned from that to go out there because I know what I'm doing. I know I can do this. Just portray it when you walk on the court. Because when people watch you referee, they watch you when you walk in the gym with your street clothes on, towing your bag, to the time you show up on the floor to referee that game. So it's really important that you carry yourself like a referee. You look like a referee, you dress like a referee. And I've always preached that to people, that you have to look the part to be the part. So the thing I learned on the Metro Championship game is, number one, I didn't know that my partner, who, and I'm forgetting his name right now, I'll come up with it, but I didn't know that he and Mike Bethea from Rainier Beach had a major catastrophe in the the fall summer league at Bellevue College. So they didn't like each other. And we ended up giving the coach a technical foul that probably wasn't warranted. And then my partner wanted to give him another technical foul to throw him out of the game. And at that point, that it wasn't exactly going to get us out of the gym alive. So I decided that that wasn't the best thing to do. I learned to never, ever go talk to a coach or especially the announcer before I talk to my partners and figure out, okay, as a crew, what are we going to do? What did you see? You know, how many players did you see come off the bench? We ended up getting involved with the scuffle, trying to break it up instead of just stepping back, observing, taking numbers. So the next game, that was my first thing in my pregame. If we have anything like a fight, and thank God I never had another one, we're going to get together and we're going to observe. So I learned those things. And you know, I've been refereeing 37 years at that point in time, and you think it's never going to happen to you. Guess what? It did, because we weren't ready for it. And I think that we let the thing build to the point where we should have been able to squall it before it started. I've always been, and I'm going to use my friend Joe Thompson. You can usually smell it before it happens, and we didn't smell it that night, and it came. It blew up on us.
Thanks.
Scott, we got a question from Doug, and then we'll go to Big Fella next.
Oh God, not Doug. Hi, Dougie.
Hey, Scotty, how are you doing?
Good.
Hey, first of all, I want to personally thank you for everything that you've done for the PNBOA, as well as myself and the mentoring you've done for so many officials over the years. I kind of wanted to touch on something that you did for 20 years that I don't think you've mentioned yet, is you organized and took a bunch of people every year down to Reno, and where you work AAU games down there for Mike Connors. And I'd kind of like you, there's so many stories I'm sure you have from down there, but maybe your best Reno story of the things that went on down there, because you did do a lot of rec and a lot of things, crazy things happened down in Reno.
Thanks for that nice words, Doug, and you're welcome. Yeah, so Kellie and I, well, I'm going to say Doug, because Doug went every year but one, took a group of referees to Reno. And there's a lot of people. I'm looking at Stacy Brodzik that's gone a million times to that tournament. Kellie and I started doing that, God, the first year we were married, so 1990. So we actually did it for 22 years, and it finally came to an end, and I really miss it. So every year we would beg people to go to Reno. I'm not going to say give them the opportunity, because we were begging them to go. Because I had a deal with Mike Connors that where if I could do every gym he had down there, our crew would get every gym. So I had a little formula that we did. If I could get X officials, then I figured I could do, 12 gyms, 14 gyms, or however many we could do. So we did that for 22 years, like I said. And yeah, I did do a lot of those games, but one of my favorite memories, and then I'm going to go into one of my worst memories, Stacy Brodzik and I were working a game with Bruce Corson, who's a Division I official from Alaska. And Bruce came from the PNBOA. So we were doing, I want to say it was either the 5th or 6th grade championship game. And one of the gyms was as far away from our hotel as you could get. And we were going along doing the game. And we had an all-black school from Oakland, or all-black team. It was a traveling team. And that particular group had probably 8 or 9 teams in that tournament in all age divisions. Always had the best looking uniforms, all the best looking sweats. And probably the most parents at the games because they just drove over from Oakland. We had them against a team from Salt Lake City, a bunch of Mormon kids from Salt Lake City. And the Mormon kids won by 30 some points. So game over. We're over there to, changing our shoes or taking our shoes off and resting because we had one more game to do. And we're chatting along, and all of a sudden I look up and see this rather large black lady approaching. And she wasn't happy with the job we did. Well, being the gentleman that I am, I stood up to defend us. They were coming at Stacy because she happened to be first in line, and Stacy puts her hand on my leg, puts me back down, says, "Scotty, I got this." So she tells the lady that I'm sorry that you feel that way, and blah blah, and she's letting her down easy. And all of a sudden, I see this big hand on the lady's shoulder. It's her husband. And I'm going, oh my God, here we go. It was, hey, you three, great job. Thank you for the game. Honey, let's go. And yanks her away, and off they went, and all was good. And we went on to the next game. It was okay.
I remember that game clearly, Scott. I remember our first
Well, it's one of the ones I'm not going to ever forget.
Do you remember the conversation we had about the testosterone?
Yes, I do. I do. Too much of it going on.
Yeah, Scott and Bruce had this little, they want to both be the alpha dogs on the game, and they were calling shit all over the place. And I was like, and I was just a baby ref. But, end of the first quarter, Scott says, what do you think? And I said, there is way too much testosterone out here. And he knew exactly what I was talking about. And the rest of the game was great. But
yep.
I was a little ballsy for saying that to these two pros. I was a nobody.
But that's what makes Stacy great, because she knew us well enough where she knew she could say it too. And that's another one of the really good points, that you have to be honest with each other, and you have to know your partners are going to react that way. And Stacy knew me well enough to know that that's the way I was going to react. So one of the other interesting things that happened in Reno was Kellie and Greg were kind of once we got down to Reno, I had done most of the work, because I did, back then I was doing flights for people, hotels for people, doing all the assigning and all that crap. By the time the tournament started, I was pretty much letting Kellie and Greg take care of things. So I went golfing with Turcotte on Friday morning. We were out screwing around. I get back. No, I get a call on the golf course. There's been a bomb threat at one of the gymnasiums that we had like a million games scheduled. And that gym had 2 courts. So I don't remember how many games we had on it. By the time I got back home from golfing, Greg and Kellie had the schedule all done, communicated with everybody they needed to know. Everything was good. So when I got back, I finished my last 9 holes of golf, freaked out because I knew I had to get back and redo everything. By the time I got back, Kellie and Greg had it all taken care of. And that, we had a couple snafus like that, where floods in the gym, gas leaks in the gym, just all kinds of interesting stuff happened. For the most part, it was wonderful trips, but besides the basketball, it was a really good bonding experience and a camaraderie experience for all the people that went on the trip. The only tough decisions had to be made every night is where we're going for dinner. And when you get 25 people to go to dinner, that's the tough decision. So I used to just let Doug make the decision, and we were all good. Who else?
Thanks, Scott. We got big fella.
In the old days when we had a 2-person, when we actually had to work, Scott and I are working a Kinko game, and his coach is screaming at us at the end of the game. And we're walking off the court, and they lost by 30. He goes, "You guys were terrible." And I said, "Well, coach, I'm only good for 10 points. Scott's good for 15. You still lost by 5. But I want to say something else, Scott. We didn't talk about it enough. Service. I know you're still waiting for your first check in the mail, but service to the PNBOA. And I think you've been president, secretary, evaluation, treasurer. Maybe talk about it. I think over the last 10 years, we've had a hard time getting people to run for the board. Maybe talk a little bit about service to the PNBOA.
Yeah, I've probably held every role on the board except for the person that takes notes. What's that, the secretary? I'm not a good note taker, so somebody else always took that role. But I've had every other role. Like John said, I've been the president several times. I think it's really rewarding to be on the board. I've probably been on the board 25-ish of my 42 years, maybe more. I think that it's good to, to have an input into what's going on in the group. And if you want to change the group, if you want to have new ideas, then you should get on the board and be a member. One of the things, Ira just sent me a funny note. I got to tell you about that one. One of the things that we have a lot of people that complain about the way the associations run, but then they don't get on the board. So if you really want to know how the board really works and what really goes on, I would run for the board. It's rewarding. It's hard work. You have to do what you say you're going to do. You can't just be on the board and skate along. We've had those people over the past, years that get on the board because they think they're going to get a better schedule, and then they don't do anything. Believe me, being on the board doesn't get you a better schedule. It gets you more involved in the association, though. John, is that what you want me to?
Oh, and hey, Scott, I'll add the secretary role has evolved, particularly with Joanna at the helm. So
yes, it has. That's why I'm not doing it.
So
if
someone out there is
website and all those things, and and one thing about Joanna is, man, when she says that she's going to do something, like I'm going to get the minutes out, and what date they're done. And that's one of the toughest roles on the board. So yeah, it's not because I didn't want to do it. It's because I wasn't very good at it.
Yeah. So those who might be computer inclined, tech savvy, we're looking for you because Joanna is rolling off the board. And they're small.
I forgot about that. I got one more funny story, and then I'm going to tell the Ira story about John Lindsay. John and I were doing a game at Cleveland, like he said, back in the two-person days, which Cleveland wasn't the easiest gym to work at. And I don't remember who they were playing, but I was just getting ripped by the coach, probably rightfully so. And we're going along the game, and all of a sudden, John blows his whistle, calls a technical foul. Well, he whacks the coach. The coach said, "John, I was not yelling at you." John said, "Well, if you're yelling at my partner, you're yelling at me, so you deserved a technical foul." And that was the epitome of having your partner's back. So thank you for that, John. 30 years back, 35 years, whatever it was. So I'm going to tell you one funny story about Ira Dunbar. It was on one of our Reno AAU trips back a long time ago. And we'd also would get involved in a softball tournament. So half the referees wouldn't work much on Saturday because we were always getting in a one-day tournament. Well, we had a bet one year where we put in $10 into a pool, and whoever got the highest batting average got the money. So that's like, I don't know, 140, 150 bucks, because we usually had, 14 or 15 guys playing. Well, if you hit the ball over the fence, it was a dead ball out. So it cost you on your batting average. Well, I never told Ira that. Well, Ira could hit the ball out of the park just about any time he wanted to. So we're up in the last couple innings. It's a close game. Couple guys on base, 2 outs. Well, Ira rips the ball, and the pitch is coming in, and before he even swung at the ball, he said, "See ya," hit the ball way out of the ballpark, starts jogging around the bases, and the umpire comes up and says, "Sorry, you're out." So needless to say, he didn't really appreciate that. And oh, by the way, he lost a batting title by 1 hit. So I've been hearing about that for however many years that was. Ira, did I tell the story pretty accurately?
Sounds rigged, Scott. Sounds like Ira should have won.
Ira should have won.
Hey, Scott, a couple of your favorite places to ref and why?
High school?
Sure.
Kentwood High School. Because I always have good games there. I am treated great by the administration. I know the scorekeepers and timers and the athletic directors very well. I never have to worry about my car being there when I get back to my car at the end of the game. That's one. And my other favorite school is probably 2 more. Probably Garfield, for the same exact reasons. They usually have good teams. They usually have good games. Always had good rapport with everybody involved. And probably Eastlake High School for the same reasons. And mostly Eastlake because I have a great relationship with the women's coach and program.
I thought you were going to say Hazen. You can just jump the fence.
Yeah, I live right next door to Hazen, and I always drive my car over because it's always pouring down rain.
Hey, Scott.
The best thing about you, Scott, is Kelly. Thank you.
No question about it. No argument.
Hey, Scott, it's Chuck.
Yeah.
You remember more things that happen in games or in your post games?
One more time, Chuck.
Do you remember more things that happen in your games or remember things that happen at your post games?
Probably in my post games. And a lot of the things that we should have done. A lot of games where.
Not those post games.
Huh?
The fun post games.
Yeah.
What's more memorable, working the games or what you built over the last 42 years?
What I've built over the last 42 years, for sure.
Right.
The friendships I've made. I'm looking at all the faces on this call. All the people that I'm looking at right here that I've become friends with. Learn from, been mentors to. I see one face on there, Kevin Chin. He and I have gone to war a million times together. I'll ref anytime, anywhere with him, because you know what you're going to get every game.
Well said, Scott. Does anyone else have any more questions? Well, it does not sound like it. Scott, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Again, like Big Fella said, I mean, just thank you for all the service. As a younger official, definitely help pave the way and make the PNBOA what it is. So thanks for giving your time back and sharing all the stories and your knowledge and experience and just the overall journey with us.
Hey, I appreciate you asking me to do it, Bob. It was an honor to get asked.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Scott.
you're very
Great.
welcome. Everyone else, thank you for joining. Good to see all of you. There is one more session next week. So take care. Happy holidays. Stay safe, and we'll talk with you next week. Thank you.
Get ready. We're going to play this year. We're going to play this year.
Thanks, Scott.
Future
Merry
Scott.
Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah.
Stop.
Have a good one, guys. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Thanks, Bobby.
Okay.
Hey, did you leave
Hey,
anything
Scott,
out?
Thanks,
Scott,
Scott.
before you go,
What?
I might
I
have
have a
missed the Wally.
question.
Go ahead.
Am I still on here?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Scott,
fire
you
away,
played in
Carl.
the Boeing League.
Yes,
Did you ever play with Jim Pritchard?
I did.